There is a reason why no foreign army has successfully invaded the continental United States in over 2 centuries. It is not purely about military strength, though. America certainly has that. It is not just about advanced weapons or superior strategy. The real answer lies in something far older than any weapon system, any government, or any ideology. It lies in the land itself. America sits in a geographic sweet spot so absurdly fortunate that it borders on unfair. While other nations throughout history have struggled with hostile neighbors, vulnerable borders, and resource scarcity, the United States inherited a continental fortress wrapped in oceans, blessed with navigable rivers, rich farmland, and natural resources on a scale that most countries can only dream about. This was not earned through clever planning or strategic brilliance. It was an accident of plate tectonics, ocean currents, and the way continents drifted over millions of years. And that accident became the foundation of American power. Geography does not guarantee success. Plenty of nations have squandered natural advantages through corruption, conflict, or poor governance. But geography does set the starting conditions, and America's starting conditions were exceptional. From the moment European settlers began expanding westward, they were working with a continent that seemed designed for empire building. Vast stretches of arable land, rivers that flowed in convenient directions for trade, mountain ranges that protected rather than divided, coastlines on 2 different oceans, neighbors to the north and south that posed little military threat, no hostile great powers within thousands of miles. If you were designing a country from scratch with the goal of making it nearly impossible to conquer, you would struggle to improve on what nature handed to the United States. This script will break down exactly how geography made America not just powerful, but almost invincible. Let us start with the most obvious geographic advantage. America is surrounded by water on 2 sides, and not just any water. To the east lies the Atlantic Ocean, roughly 3,000 miles wide at its narrowest point between the United States and Europe. To the west lies the Pacific Ocean, an even more staggering expanse of roughly 5,000 miles between California and Asia. These are not narrow seas that can be crossed quickly with a small fleet. These are enormous bodies of water that, for most of human history, represented nearly insurmountable logistical barriers. Any nation attempting to invade the United States from across either ocean would need to transport massive numbers of troops, vehicles, weapons, fuel, food, and supplies over thousands of miles of open water, all while maintaining supply lines vulnerable to interdiction. Even today, with modern naval technology, this would be a staggering challenge. In earlier centuries, it was effectively impossible. Compare this to Europe, where nations are packed closely together, often sharing land borders with multiple neighbors. France shares borders with 8 countries. Germany shares borders with 9. Poland has been invaded repeatedly throughout history, precisely because it sits on a flat plain between powerful rivals with no natural barriers to slow advancing armies. Russia, despite its vast size, has been invaded from the west multiple times because armies can march directly across the North European plain. Britain, despite being an island, is only 21 miles from mainland Europe at the narrowest point of the English Channel, close enough that you can see the French coast on a clear day. The United States, by contrast, has no such vulnerabilities. Even if an enemy wanted to assemble a massive invasion fleet, they would have to cross an ocean so wide that the logistical burden alone would cripple most attempts before they even reached American shores. And if they somehow managed that, they would still have to face the next layer of geographic defense, the continental interior. No serious invasion attempt has been made across the Atlantic or Pacific since the War of 1812, when the British, who already had a foothold in Canada and a powerful navy, burned Washington, D.C., but ultimately failed to reconquer their former colonies. Since then, the oceans have functioned as a nearly perfect defense. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941, but Pearl Harbor is in Hawaii, roughly 2,500 miles from the mainland, and even that attack was a naval strike rather than a ground invasion. The Japanese had no realistic hope of invading California or Washington, The tyranny of distance was simply too great. The oceans do not just protect America from invasion, they also give American naval power global reach while denying that same reach to potential enemies. The U.S. Navy can project force worldwide because it operates from a secure home base that no one can credibly threaten. Enemy navies, by contrast, must operate thousands of miles from their own shores if they want to even approach American waters, stretching their supply lines to the breaking point. To the north, America shares a border with Canada, the longest undefended border in the world. To the south, it shares a border with Mexico. Both neighbors are friendly, relatively stable democracies with economies deeply integrated with the United States. Neither poses any serious military threat. This is not a minor detail. It is a geopolitical jackpot. Throughout history, most great powers have had to deal with hostile or unstable neighbors. Rome fought constant wars on its frontiers. China built the Great Wall to defend against northern invaders. Russia has historically been paranoid about invasion from the West and has pursued buffer states and territorial expansion as a defense strategy. European nations have spent centuries locked in rivalry, forming and breaking alliances, fighting wars over borders that shifted constantly. The United States, meanwhile, has not had to worry about a land invasion from a neighboring power since the 19th century. Canada and the United States share cultural, linguistic, and historical ties, and Canada is a member of NATO, making any conflict between the two almost unthinkable. Mexico, while facing internal challenges related to organized crime and economic inequality, has neither the capability nor the desire to invade the United States. In fact, both neighbors are economically dependent on trade with America, giving them strong incentives to maintain peaceful relations. This means the United States does not need to station large armies on its northern or southern borders. It does not need to maintain expensive fortifications or constantly prepare for the possibility of a two-front war. It can focus its military resources on projecting power abroad rather than defending the homeland. This freedom is extraordinary. Imagine if the United States shared a border with a hostile great power, the way South Korea shares a border with North Korea, or the way Poland once shared borders with Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. The entire strategic calculus would change. Resources that currently go toward global power projection would have to be redirected toward homeland defense. The geography of the borders themselves also matters. The northern border with Canada runs largely through forests, lakes, and mountains in the west, and the Great Lakes in the east. The Great Lakes are massive bodies of fresh water that function as natural barriers, and the terrain in much of the border region is difficult for large-scale military movements. The southern border with Mexico runs through deserts and the Rio Grande River. While the southern border has been a focus of political debate around immigration, it has never been a military threat. Even if Mexico hypothetically wanted to invade, the logistical and military challenges would be insurmountable. The United States has overwhelming military superiority, control of key infrastructure, and defensive depth that would make any attempted invasion a disaster for the attacker. In short, America's neighbors are not just weak. They are also separated by terrain that favors defense. Even if an enemy somehow crossed the oceans and established a beachhead on American soil, they would then face the challenge of conquering the continental interior. The United States is enormous. It spans roughly 2,800 miles from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast. It covers approximately 3.8 million square miles of territory, making it the third or fourth largest country in the world depending on how you measure. This is not a small island that can be overrun quickly. This is a vast landmass with multiple climate zones, mountain ranges, river systems, and geographic barriers that would slow or stop any invading force. An army that landed on the East Coast would have to fight its way across the Appalachian Mountains, then the Mississippi River, then the Great Plains, then the Rocky Mountains, all while dealing with a defending force that knows the terrain, controls the infrastructure, and can fall back and regroup across thousands of miles of depth. History shows that conquering large continental nations is extraordinarily difficult, even when they lack the military and economic power of the United States. Napoleon invaded Russia in 1812 with the largest army Europe had ever seen, and the vastness of Russian territory combined with scorched earth tactics and harsh winters destroyed his forces. Hitler made the same mistake in 1941, and again, the sheer size of the Soviet Union, combined with logistical nightmares and fierce resistance, led to catastrophic losses. The United States is similarly vast, but with far better infrastructure, a far stronger economy, and a far more capable military. Any invading force would not just face distance. They would face highways that could be destroyed, bridges that could be blown up, supply depots that could be relocated, and a population of over 330 million people, many of whom are armed. The very idea of occupying and controlling the American interior is a fantasy. Beyond the sheer size, the continental interior is also rich in resources. The United States has some of the most fertile farmland in the world, concentrated in the Midwest and Great Plains. It has vast oil and natural gas reserves, particularly in Texas, North Dakota, and Alaska. It has coal, iron, copper, timber, and freshwater in abundance. The Mississippi River system, one of the longest and most navigable river networks in the world, connects the interior to the Gulf of Mexico, allowing cheap transportation of goods. This means the United States is not dependent on imports for basic survival. It can feed itself, fuel itself, and supply itself with raw materials even in the event of a total blockade. Most nations do not have this luxury. Japan, for example, must import most of its energy and food. Britain must import food and fuel. China imports vast quantities of oil and relies on global trade for economic growth. The United States, while deeply integrated into the global economy, could theoretically survive in isolation far better than most other countries. This self-sufficiency makes it nearly impossible to starve or economically strangle America into submission. Geography is not just about oceans and size. It is also about the specific features of the land: mountains, rivers, deserts, and climate. America has all of these in configurations that enhance its defensive position. Let us start with mountains. The Appalachian Mountains run along the eastern United States, from Alabama to Maine. While not as tall or imposing as some mountain ranges, they still create a barrier between the coastal plains and the interior. Historically, they slowed westward expansion and funneled movement through specific passes and valleys. In a defensive scenario, they would do the same to an invader. The Rocky Mountains, meanwhile, are a far more formidable barrier. Stretching from Canada down through the western United States into New Mexico, the Rockies are tall, rugged, and difficult to cross, especially for large mechanized armies. They separate the Great Plains from the western states and create natural choke points that could be defended with relatively small forces. Rivers also play a critical role. The Mississippi River is the most important, but it is far from the only one. The Ohio River, the Missouri River, the Colorado River, and dozens of smaller waterways crisscross the country. Rivers can be used for transportation and trade, but they can also serve as defensive lines. Crossing a major river under fire is one of the most dangerous operations in warfare. Bridges can be destroyed, fords can be defended, and armies attempting to cross are vulnerable. During the American Civil War, control of rivers like the Mississippi was strategically crucial, and both sides fought bitterly over key river crossings. In a hypothetical invasion scenario, rivers would serve as natural defensive lines that would slow or stop advancing forces. Deserts also matter. The southwestern United States includes large stretches of arid, hostile terrain. The Mojave Desert, the Sonoran Desert, and parts of Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico are environments where water is scarce, temperatures are extreme, and movement is difficult. An invading army trying to cross these regions would face logistical nightmares. Climate is another factor. The United States spans multiple climate zones, from the frozen tundra of Alaska to the subtropical heat of Florida. This diversity means that any invading force would have to adapt to rapidly changing conditions as they moved across the country. Troops trained for desert warfare would struggle in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. Forces equipped for cold weather would suffer in the swamps of Louisiana. The United States, by contrast, has a military trained and equipped to operate in all of these environments. The variety of terrain and climate is not a weakness, it is a strength. It forces any potential enemy to prepare for everything at once, which is nearly impossible. The United States can use this diversity to its advantage, choosing where and how to fight based on the terrain that favors its forces. No other country combines such size, such resource wealth, such defensive depth, and such geographic variety. Geography is not just about what exists naturally. It is also about what humans build to take advantage of geography. The Panama Canal is a perfect example. Completed in 1914, the canal allows ships to travel between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans without sailing around the southern tip of South America, saving thousands of miles and weeks of travel time. This is an enormous strategic asset for the United States. The canal was built by the U.S. government, operated by the U.S. for most of the 20th century, and remains critical to American naval power. It allows the U.S. Navy to move ships quickly between the two oceans, meaning the Atlantic and Pacific fleets can support each other if needed. No other nation has this advantage. If an enemy wanted to move a fleet from one ocean to the other, they would have to sail around South America or around Africa, losing precious time and exposing their ships to interdiction. The canal is also a vulnerability for potential enemies. If the United States controls the canal, it can deny access to rival powers. During peacetime, the canal is open to international shipping, but in wartime, the United States could easily close it or restrict passage, crippling enemy logistics. Beyond the Panama Canal, the United States has access to or control over other key maritime choke points. The Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, the Suez Canal, and other critical waterways are not on American soil, but the U.S. Navy has the global reach to influence or control them. This is possible precisely because of America's geographic position, protected at home by oceans, free from worrying about land invasions, and able to project power worldwide. The geography of the Western Hemisphere also matters. The United States is the dominant power in the Americas. There are no other great powers in North or South America. This is the essence of the Monroe Doctrine, declared in 1823, which warned European powers to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. While the Monroe Doctrine was initially more symbolic than enforceable, over time the United States gained the military and economic power to back it up. Today, no outside power can establish a meaningful military presence in the Americas without American approval. This regional dominance means the United States does not have to worry about a rival power building bases or staging invasions from nearby territories. The Western Hemisphere is essentially an American sphere of influence, and geography is the foundation of that dominance. South America is separated from Africa by the Atlantic. Central America is narrow and easily controlled. Canada and Mexico, as discussed, are not threats. The Caribbean is dotted with islands, many of which have historical or military ties to the United States. Cuba is the only notable exception, but even Cuba is a small island with limited power projection capabilities. Geography shapes not just military power, but also economic power, and economic power is the foundation of military power in the modern world. The United States has a geography that is almost perfectly designed for economic growth. Start with agriculture. The Great Plains and the Midwest contain some of the most productive farmland on Earth. Flat terrain, rich soil, adequate rainfall, and a long growing season make this region ideal for growing wheat, corn, soybeans, and other staple crops. The United States is one of the world's largest food exporters, and it produces more than enough to feed its own population. This agricultural abundance is not just about food security. It is also about economic leverage. Food is a strategic resource, and countries that control food production have power over those that do not. Now add natural resources. The United States has oil fields in Texas, Alaska, and North Dakota. It has natural gas in abundance, particularly in shale formations that have been unlocked by fracking technology. It has coal in Appalachia and Wyoming. It has iron ore, copper, rare earth elements, and timber. The combination of agricultural and mineral wealth means the United States has the raw materials needed to sustain a modern industrial economy without relying heavily on imports. During both world wars, this was a decisive advantage. While European nations struggled with blockades and resource shortages, the United States had everything it needed at home. Infrastructure is another piece of the puzzle. The Mississippi River system is one of the greatest natural transportation networks in the world. It allows goods to be moved cheaply from the interior of the country to the Gulf of Mexico, where they can be shipped globally. The Great Lakes are another natural heartland to the Atlantic via the St. Lawrence Seaway. Rivers are not the only infrastructure advantage. The United States also developed an extensive system of railroads, highways, and later, airports. The interstate highway system, built in the mid-20th century, connects every major city and allows for rapid movement of goods and people. This infrastructure network is possible because of geography. Flat terrain in much of the country makes road and rail construction easier and cheaper than in mountainous regions. Navigable rivers reduce the need for expensive canals. The United States did not have to blast through massive mountain ranges or cross impassable swamps to build a national transportation network. Nature provided the foundation, and Americans built on it. The result is an economy that is extraordinarily efficient at moving goods and people, which translates into wealth, and wealth translates into military power. Geography continued to matter even as technology advanced. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union faced off in a nuclear standoff that could have ended in global catastrophe. But even in the age of intercontinental ballistic missiles, geography gave the United States advantages. The Soviet Union, despite its vast size, was surrounded by potential enemies. It bordered China, which became a rival. It bordered Eastern Europe, which it controlled through force but which remained restless and unstable. It had long, vulnerable borders and limited access to warm water ports. The United States, by contrast, was protected by oceans, had friendly neighbors, and had naval bases around the world. This meant the U.S. could position nuclear submarines in multiple oceans, making its nuclear deterrent nearly impossible to eliminate in a first strike. The United States also had strategic depth. Even if the Soviet Union launched a nuclear attack, the vast size of the country meant that not every city, military base, or industrial center could be destroyed. Simultaneously, command and control systems could be dispersed across the continent. Bomber bases could be spread out. Missile silos could be hidden in remote areas. The Soviet Union had similar advantages in terms of size, but it lacked the geographic isolation and oceanic buffers that the United States enjoyed. American submarines could patrol off Soviet coasts. Soviet submarines trying to do the same faced detection and interdiction by a superior U.S. Navy. Geography also shaped alliance structures. The United States built a network of alliances across Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. NATO, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and others. These alliances were possible because the United States could project power globally while remaining secure at home. The Soviet Union, by contrast, had to worry about threats on multiple fronts and struggled to maintain control over its own satellite states. The end of the Cold War did not end the geographic advantages. If anything, they became even more pronounced. With the Soviet Union gone, the United States became the sole superpower, and no rival has emerged with the capability to threaten the American homeland. China is rising economically and militarily, but it faces geographic constraints that the United States does not. China is surrounded by rivals: India, Japan, Vietnam, and others. It relies on imports of oil and resources that must travel through choke points like the Strait of Malacca, which the U.S. Navy could blockade in a conflict. China has no equivalent to America's two-ocean access, and no neighbors as weak and friendly as Canada and Mexico. Russia, meanwhile, remains vast but economically weak, and it still faces the same geographic challenges it always has: vulnerable borders, limited warm water ports, and hostile or unstable neighbors. Let us return to the central question: why is the United States almost impossible to invade? The answer is a combination of every factor we have discussed. The oceans create a logistical barrier so large that no nation on Earth could realistically transport and sustain an invasion force across them. The continental interior is so vast that even if an enemy landed troops, they could not conquer and hold the territory. The United States has overwhelming military superiority, both in terms of technology and sheer numbers. It has a nuclear arsenal that guarantees mutual destruction for any attacker. It has friendly neighbors and no hostile great powers within thousands of miles. It has abundant natural resources and the infrastructure to move and use them efficiently. It has geographic features, mountains, rivers, deserts, that favor defense. And it has a population of over 330 million, many of whom are armed and would resist occupation. Even in the most extreme hypothetical scenarios, invasion fails. Suppose China attempted an amphibious assault on the West Coast. They would need to transport millions of troops across the Pacific, through waters patrolled by the U.S. Navy and Air Force, past Hawaii and other defensive positions, and then land on a heavily defended coastline. Even if they succeeded in landing, they would face immediate counterattacks, supply line interdiction, and the need to fight their way across mountains, deserts, and rivers against an enemy with total air superiority and nuclear weapons. The logistics are impossible. The same applies to any hypothetical invasion from Europe, Russia, or anywhere else. The tyranny of distance combined with American military power makes it a non-starter. History proves this. The last time a foreign power invaded the continental United States was during the War of 1812, over 200 years ago, and even then the British only managed limited raids before being pushed back. No modern nation has even attempted it. During World War II, Japan attacked Hawaii and Alaska, but never seriously considered invading the mainland. Germany never had the naval capability to cross the Atlantic. The Soviet Union, at the height of its power, never seriously planned a conventional invasion. The reason is simple. It cannot be done. Geography, combined with American military and economic strength, creates a defensive position so strong that no rational adversary would try. This does not mean the United States is invulnerable. Cyber attacks, terrorism, nuclear weapons, and economic warfare are all real threats. But in terms of a traditional military invasion and occupation, the United States is as close to invincible as any nation in history. So here is the conclusion. The United States did not become a superpower purely through hard work, innovation, or superior governance, though those things mattered. It became a superpower because it won the geographic lottery. It inherited a continent rich in resources, protected by oceans, blessed with navigable rivers and fertile land, and surrounded by weak neighbors. This geographic foundation allowed the United States to grow economically without fear of invasion, to project military power globally without worrying about homeland defense, and to build alliances and institutions that reinforce its dominance. Other nations have had to fight for survival. The United States had the luxury of expansion. Other nations have had to defend vulnerable borders. The United States had natural moats. Other nations have had to import resources. The United States had them at home. Geography does not determine everything. The Soviet Union had size and resources but collapsed due to economic inefficiency and political failure. China has size and resources but faces geographic constraints and rivals. The Middle East has oil but lacks water, arable land, and stable borders. Geography sets the stage, but nations still have to perform. The United States performed, but it performed on a stage built for success. If you were designing a country to become a global hegemon, you would give it oceans for protection, resources for self-sufficiency, navigable rivers for trade, weak neighbors for security, and vast size for strategic depth. You would, in other words, create the United States. This is the superpower cheat code. It is not fair, it is not replicable, and it is not going away.